And we are live. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to click go live over here on Instagram. It takes a minute to sync, maybe. And there it is. Okay, perfect. And I just got to make sure it's muted. A couple weeks ago, I was doing it and I clicked go live on Instagram and I was like hearing myself echo. So now I'm good. All right. And I'm shutting it off so I don't see myself in the background. Excellent. So thank you, everybody who is joining us, whether you're joining us live or you are watching this recorded. We appreciate you including us in your day or evening, whatever this is the time that you're consuming this. We appreciate it. I'm confident that there's something that one of us is going to say that's going to be helpful to you in some way. So I always think it's really neat, not knowing where in the world this is getting picked up by somebody and a tip that they might use or a question that might spark that might make them create some type of solution for somebody else. So that always excites me. And with that said, I have Jennifer here with me. Now, Jennifer and I have known each other for quite some time, but lately we've been playing phone tag, ironically. So today, going live is probably the longest conversation we've been able to have in months because we kept playing phone tag. So I'm excited to have the conversation and see what types of things we get to talk about. So Jennifer, why don't you tell everybody who you are, what you do, and then we'll chat.
Yes, thanks, Deb. I'm so excited to be here with you today and have a chat finally. I am a personal development and parenting coach. I have been in personal development for over 25 years. My family owns a personal development company in Chicago. So I literally grew up learning all about mindset and, self-regulation, self-awareness, and all these really important things that now I am bringing into the parenting space. And, I do one-to-one coaching. I'm just launching a membership. So I'm just very excited to be able to bring communication skills, connection tools, and things to really enhance family relationships so that by the time your kids turn 18, they don't want to run away and run out the door. They actually enjoy coming home, spending time with you, and growing as adults together as well. So I love what I do, and I'm honored to be able to help parents every day create amazing relationships inside their families.
Yeah, I love what you do, and I love how you do it because it's a tough and this too, right? So like you said, you do mindset, just general mindset and growth and personal development, but then also parenting specific. And I do feel like the parenting piece is very unique in terms of, I should say very unique. It's distinct from the other piece because when you're talking to somebody about parenting, there's a lot of emotion that comes into play because we do carry sensitivity to knowing that like this child is being raised by me and I don't know what's going to happen. And so we overanalyze, or maybe not overanalyze, we analyze the decisions that we make, and it's a lot. And I know having 3 teenagers that there's a lot of times where I'm like, well, I could have done that better. So I think it's the piece of trying to be proactive and helping yourself react better or be clear in the moment. But it's also letting yourself move past when you make mistakes, because you're going to, and say, okay, I'm going to be honest with my child and talk about this. So for you, obviously there's overlapping, but I would think like, what are some of the things that you find specifically when you're coaching parents are some of like the key things that you kind of feel like are important for them to know right out of the gate? Like, we're going to be engaging in this coaching. Here's some important things that you should know about what this is going to look like.
Well, I think the first important thing is to understand your parenting style. And so are you a permissive parent? Are you an authoritative parent? What kind of parent are you? Because that will dictate how you interact with your kids. I think personally, the foundation of having a great relationship with your kids is communication. How do you communicate with them? How do you follow up with them when you do? Inevitably, especially in the teen and tween years, things get fraught at times with, them breaking rules, them pushing boundaries, them talking back, being disrespectful, finding their autonomy, wanting to, create their own rules in the house and out of the house. Where do they struggle with friendships, and all of that. And so communication is the basis of what I work on with parents. How do you communicate? Do you enjoy communication? And then a lot of what I do, because it comes from personal development, turns around and looks back at your own history. So how were you parented? How did your parents talk to you? What kind of a relationship did you have with them? What worked? What didn't work? And what would you like to do differently with your own children? So I think communication is the foundation that really builds anything that's going to be powerful and deep with your kids. From there comes the connection, comes the, setting the values of your house and the expectation, being able to have boundaries and accountability, and of course, building in love and fun and things like that. So, but really it's, what is my parenting style? Am I open to modifying that? Because if I find that there are parents that are like, you know what, I like what I do, I like how I was raised, they're not a good fit. I really think that people have to be able to, if they want to have deep connected relationships with their children, they have to be able to do a little bit of their own work in order to create that for themselves.
Yeah, and it's tough too, because I imagine even when you talk through some of the strategies, it's like anything. It's like if somebody's talking about how you're going to hit a baseball, and so you think about how you're going to hit a baseball, and then you actually step up to hit the baseball, you learn some things in the moment that you didn't know about when you were talking about it. And so then you have to revisit it. And so I think that's like that with coaching in general. A little trickier, I think, when you're a parent, again, because of the different pieces that fall into play there with the interaction in the moment. Oftentimes you're with your children, not 24/7 if they're going to school, but a lot, right? Yeah. So you get the strategy, you think this is great, I'm going to apply this strategy. And then when you go to do it in practice, it doesn't work out the way you thought it was going to. And there's that initial frustration, like, well, this isn't working, forget it, I don't even want to try. Or the way that the child responded to something yesterday is not the way that they're responding to it today. So in terms of like kind of revisiting some of that stuff, is it like you kind of first talk through with parents and then they start to practice some of the stuff and they come back to you and talk through like, here was where it worked, here was where it didn't, and tweak it? Is that a lot of tweaking?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because the other fun thing about parenting is that none of your children, if you have more than one, are the same. And so parenting techniques that work for my son don't always work for my daughter. And so really parenting is unfortunately a lot of trial and error and feeling out what your kid responds to, feeling out what really will repel them and they don't respond to. And so sometimes my children will say, well, why is it a little bit different for them? And I'll be honest and say, he doesn't respond to, being that disciplined approach. He, right. My son is a little bit more fluid, and, my daughter, hey, you like the rules, you like the boundaries, you like to know exactly what's expected and what the consequence is. And so really honesty and from a gentle and kind, modality is the best way to approach that. But absolutely, it is hit or miss. They come back and they talk about what worked, what didn't. And also, when you're coming in for parent coaching, you're often coming in because things don't feel right. And similar to when you go to the gym and you're out of shape, you have to build muscles. And so with parenting, there are muscles that you have to build. It's, really both parent and child have to sort of ease into some of the new ways that you're going to be parenting. And, like I said, honesty is great. And so talking about, hey, as a parent, I'm learning too. And so I'm trying to find new ways to connect with you. I'm finding new ways to communicate with you. And so we're in this together. I'd say that a lot to my kids. We're in this together. We're in it to win it, and we're in it together. So making sure that they know you're on the same team.
Yeah, I love that. So there's a couple things you said that I want to respond to. And the one is the communication you're talking about with your kids. And that's so true. And I think, some days more than others, but they appreciate when I'm honest, when I'm like, there are times where I'm like yelling, like this is the joke, right? You're like yelling, stop yelling, calm down. And I'm like, oh, well, that's like epic modeling. But even just in general, if I've had a rough day, or if sometimes it's like, there's been a whole week of maybe a little bit of nudgy things. And so then it's like that we use the phrase, the straw that broke the camel's back, right? It's that one thing. And so they're like, I do not understand why mom is getting so upset about this one thing. And it's not, it's cumulative. And because of that, because of it being cumulative and because of whatever space and place of mind I'm in at that time, I don't respond in a way that I think is the most appropriate. And so when I come back to them and I tell them like what I was upset about, I had a valid reason to be upset about, right? So it's not like I'm not going to retract and now say like, we're going to all go out for ice cream because I lost my patience. Like there still was something that deserved a consequence, but my way of responding in the moment, whether I raised my voice or said something in a way that it shouldn't have been said, that was not okay. right? And then that's allowing them to recognize it. I don't think it detracts from they still have the impact of the moment. I mean, I think when we say and do certain things, we're going to feel them just like as adults, but they do really respect and appreciate when I come to them and say, I messed up. That wasn't the best way for me to handle that situation. And I think that that's nurtured our relationship in many ways. Sometimes even more so than some of the other bonding moments is the moments where I've been like, I messed up. And the other piece, let me let you respond to that.
I was just going to say absolutely 100%. Owning our feelings and sharing them from a place of vulnerability with our children models to them ownership of their feelings and self-awareness. So that's all I was going to say.
Yeah, no, and I know from you and I just having conversations in general about parenting. And I think that also that piece, because there are extremes where people become, so, because I use the term friend kind of casually because there's different ways you can interpret the term friend. Like, I think it's okay to sit and giggle with your friend, your child, and share things with them. So some of the things you're going to do in interaction with your child are going to be very friend-like by the way that we perceive friendship. But there's a difference between that and treating your child in a way that makes them feel like they are equally responsible for you, because they're not. They're your child and it's your responsibility to take care of them. And so then you have the other extreme where there'll be people who are like, I'm the parent, what I say goes, I'm not going to retract on that. And I think in trying to balance those two extremes, we sometimes aren't certain what's the appropriate thing. And so you might be like, well, do I tell my child I messed up? Is that going to make them feel less trusting in my approach? So you have to kind of navigate that very carefully. And I think the word that you keep using, which is so important, is just being open, right? As long as you're saying to them, like, I'm not even sure how to say this the right way, but I just want you to know that I don't think I handled it well, right? You don't have to give an entirely long speech, just kind of like tipping your hand and saying like, I messed up. And I think that that's really critical. And I think even in alignment with that, like my husband and I did some coaching and I feel like we're good parents. We're supporting our kids, love us. We love them. We're very open and we're honest, but there were some things going on in the household and I was finding myself repeatedly losing my patience earlier than I wanted to be. And I'm like, something is triggering me here. And there's something that I'm triggering the situation. And I want to kind of investigate that. And we were too much in it. Mm-hmm. But, you can feel reluctant because to say like, I'm going to a parenting coach, there can be this misconception in your mind that somehow it's like saying like, I'm a terrible parent, so I have to be told how to parent. And it's really not. It's just like, I need an outside perspective. I need somebody to talk through what's happening. And there were a couple of really key things where like the phraseology that I was using, she's like, well, is it really that or is it this? And I'm like, you're right. Every time I say to my child, this is what you're doing, and it's really not that, I'm labeling it. And so I think that's really important. And you just create so much love in those conversations with adults who are struggling with that. It's monumental. It helps to really make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I think you said something really important, which is that there's this stigma about going to parent coaches that, hey, I'm not parenting properly, et cetera, et cetera. But the reason that I'm a parent coach is because I've done all the reading. I've done all the practicing. I've done all of the, going in to learn certification, et cetera, so that parents don't have to. It's like the same reason that you hire a personal trainer. Again, when you go to the gym, it's so that you don't have to do the deep dive and figure it out. You can go to someone and, within an hour have 5 examples of a way to approach a new problem that you're having with your child, or, to have on speed dial to say, hey, I think I just messed up. What do you think? How do I fix the problem? Or I'm really struggling with my daughter and I just need someone to vent to. So a lot of that is what I do in parent coaching. It isn't therapy, which I know also has a lot of stigmas. I'm a huge proponent of therapy. So I just want to say that out loud, that lots of families definitely would love to have the benefits of full, therapeutic approaches, but mine is not necessarily therapeutic, it's educational approaches. And so being able to have someone kind of on speed dial or, through a Facebook group or one-to-one every week, just doing check-ins to make sure you're moving the needle in a way that benefits your family and your children, I think is really important. So I love that you went to see someone about, your parenting and that your husband was open to doing that and that your kids responded wonderfully. It's like, I love hearing all the success stories when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I'm blessed too because my husband was completely on board. Like we were both, we were realizing again. I think for us it was I'm losing my patience more quickly than, and I guess should is a opinion point, right? I mean, different people have different, but for us, we felt we were losing our patience sooner than we wanted to be, and more quickly than we had been. And we realized it was a pressure cooker. There was a lot of different things that were going on that were just creating kind of the perfect storm for frustration. And I thought, like, our responsibility is to model the appropriate way to respond to stressful situations. And so, again, it's okay to say this is not a correct behavior or you need to change the direction that you're taking. We should be doing that in a calm way. And when you've got all these things coming at you and you feel that you're not, then you're like, okay, well, this isn't going to be productive for anybody. And, even before going to the parenting coach, there was something that there was a couple things I discovered with my daughter that were really neat and made a tremendous difference. And one of those was, I realized she would come to me, well, actually through listening to her, I realized, so it wasn't really just a total open eye thing. She would come to me sometimes and she really just wanted to tell me about something that happened during the day. And I would go into whether it was reflex from my childhood or being a coach, teacher, consultant. I don't, I'm sure the whole gamut of things came into play. I would, immediately, calmly and very lovingly, and she would even say that it's not what you're saying or how you're saying it. I just don't want to hear it right now. Like she didn't want a solution at that moment. Maybe later she might, but she just wanted to say, this person did this thing to me today and upset me. I don't need to know how to respond to it. I don't want to know. And so now when she comes to talk to me about something, she'll either tell me herself or I'll ask her, is this an advice or a vent? And that has made a huge difference because a lot of things became tense because I was giving advice and she was upset. And I'm thinking, like, I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong. I don't understand she didn't want to hear it right then. And we were like that as adults. Like sometimes I just want somebody to let me go, like, this was horrible and I'm upset. And then you can kind of move forward from that. Yes. And the other thing is sometimes if we're upset, we might actually step away from each other and we'll text to kind of connect with when it might be good to get back together. So like neither is peeking our head in the door or kind of like we're allowing that space. We're heated right now. Let's take a moment. So it can sound funny, like we're texting within the house, like you can't just walk down the hallway, but us being able to have that like communication and we're keeping the space has been really, really helpful. What are some of the tips that you found with things? Because I see you nodding at those and I know you've got a whole host of suggestions that you give to people. What are some of the, whether we want to call them little steps or at least steps that you think that people can do that make a huge difference? Things like those.
Well, those are actually, the texting thing is something that I do also recommend to my clients. Another thing that I recommend is having like a go back and forth journal, especially when you get into larger arguments. And so kids oftentimes can't articulate what their feelings are. They need to kind of sit on them and settle on them. And also they're shy. They don't know what is appropriate to come and talk to us about. Sometimes they might be afraid to tell us things. And so what I started when my son was younger was we had a journal that went back and forth where, he would write out how he was feeling based on an argument we might have had, or if he were in trouble for something, or I would write out to start like, hey, these are the things that I was frustrated about. Oftentimes if I had raised my voice, I would apologize and say, I don't like raising my voice to you, and I'm sorry that I did that. I am trying to model parental behavior, and that wasn't good role modeling. And, I love you, and, I would love to hear what was going on for you in that argument. And then he would write back and, kind of going back and forth a little bit with the journal so that they can always feel like they have a way to, and then we would just leave it in a drawer in his room. So he knew it was private. His sister couldn't read it. My husband wouldn't read it and things like that. So that's one way that we go back and forth with sort of going through conflict. And I think something that you said is so important. And that is that as parents, we want to fix it. From the time that they are born and they can't communicate at all with us, it's okay, what is it? Do you need to be fed? Do you need a diaper change? Do I need to burp you? Whatever. And so oftentimes we literally from the time they come out of the womb, we are trying to fix the problem. No parent wants to see their child hurt. Every parent wants to give, for the benefit of the doubt, I believe every parent wants to give their child an experience better than what they had growing up. And so I feel like oftentimes we step in too quickly. And so often, and this was something that I had to learn myself, when, my daughter comes home upset from school, so-and-so wasn't really talking to her at the lunch table. There was some, drama among her friends that upset her that didn't really involve her. I'll ask her, do you just want me to give you a hug? Do you just want me to listen? What do you need right now? And you'd be amazed at how often she wants a hug. And so, being able to do physical touch, if they're open to it, putting your hand on their knee, whatever, and just saying, I'm here if you need anything, is a huge game changer, I think, for kids, because often they don't want you to fix their problems. And circling back later to say, is there anything I can do to help? Do you want to talk through, how to approach a conversation with a friend? I do a lot of role playing with my kids, where if they're having issues with friendships, or even with my husband, we parent very differently. And sometimes they're afraid to go maybe have a conversation about something with him. And I'll say, all right, let's talk it out. And so we go back and forth and talk about, maybe I give them some suggested things to say if they're like, I don't know what to say, which is normal because they're young, they're still learning. And so being able to say, well, you could approach it this way or this way, which is more comfortable for you, and giving them words to be able to use that feel comfortable for them. And I really only do that when they're in a situation where they have to go back and address something that's making them very uncomfortable. And that's oftentimes with peer relationships, where they feel stuck and they don't know what to say to get out of the situation that they might be in, where they're feeling sad or frustrated or angry at somebody or hurt.
Yeah, I mean, that's the trick, right? Is that in teenagehood, and that's why sometimes I have to remind myself, which I'm going to make it sound so simple right now. We know that it's not simple, but in the moment, like when they're testing the boundaries or they're pushing back, and it can feel infuriating. You're like, why is this child doing this to me? But they're not doing it to you. Like, biologically right now, what's going on for them, particularly teenagers, but even throughout their lives, the phases of development where they start to push different types of boundaries. We talk about when kids are 2 and 3. It's because they're figuring out who am I in this world? How do I navigate it? How do my words impact people? How do my actions impact people? And sometimes those words and actions that they use are going to, result in really great things. And sometimes they're not going to result in great things. And so it's like you said, it's tough because you're watching it happen, but you're like, I realize the reason that you're shouting at me right now and saying these things is you're kind of testing, like, what does my boundary setting look like? And even I would find it would be funny because, like, my oldest would come home and he would just be in a bad mood, and he would, he didn't come home and say I had a really bad day. He would just come home and be being kind of mean. And I'm like, I don't know where this is coming from. And like a couple days would go by before all of a sudden he would talk to us about these things that had happened. Because in the moment, in the day that he was in a bad mood and we're like, something going on, he'd be like, no, leave me alone. 2 days later, the stuff comes back and you're like, oh. So I do try to remind myself this is part of their growth, or they might be going through something, but at the same time, firm but lovingly saying, like, that's not acceptable for you to say that to me. So it's hard. It's like, it's a lot of emotional turmoil that's going on. I keep trying to remind myself and forgetting, I think, maybe even daily.
No, parenting is a journey, definitely a journey. And, you're walking that fine line of them being able to figure out these things on their own and you wanting to be able to contribute to their growth and their capacity. And so, allowing them a couple of days. And again, I think it's really important. Something that I think parents are really afraid of right now is creating boundaries and accountability. I notice that a lot in my parent coaching. Well, I don't want to tell my daughter that she can't have social media because everybody has it, but they really don't want their daughter to have social media. I really don't, like the way that my son talks to me, but, he's got all this stuff going on at school and with friend groups and whatever. And so I don't want to really push back. And I think it's really important that we do. And this is sort of that going back to where you were talking about being friendly or friends-ish with your kids, right, and, being the parent. I think that the parenting part comes in with boundaries and accountability and talking about your values, there were these books that I read to my children when they were really little. And one was like, about a puppy, and it was like, tails are not for pulling and hands are not for hitting. And one of them was, words are not for hurting. And so as they've been coming up through life, even now, sometimes my son will, kind of go off and, be upset about something. And I'll be like, listen, we don't use words that hurt in our house. So I would love it if you go take a time out. I really, really want to hear what you have to say. I understand that you're angry with me and I want to hear about it, but let's take a time out. And that's that self-regulation piece, sort of teaching them that it's okay to walk away and self-regulate instead of just, vomiting out all the anger and the frustration and the angst, which, hey, you got to go to the gym to work that out. Great. You want to go beat your pillow in your room? Okay. You do what you got to do to sort of purge whatever that feeling is to come back and talk to me about that. So, we talk a lot about, boundaries, expectations, and values in that way. Still allowing them to have their feelings and validating, hey, it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to be angry at me or dad or your sister. It's just how you come back and communicate about it that's going to be the key to having that connection piece that's so important.
It's interesting as you were talking about that. I was noticing it's kind of parallels. It's like, as a parent coach, you're kind of teaching parents how to be personal development coaches. Because that's really what we're helping our kids to do, is learn how to communicate, learn how to understand, because a lot of whether it's genetics or it's environmental things that trigger us are different across, right? One person might be fine with something being said and another people's is bothered by it. We have to be aware of those things in order to navigate them, so that we know, like, oh, that made me really angry. What made me really angry? Oh, it was that phrase. I know that phrase makes me angry. And we still have to do that ourselves, which is why we work with people that help us to do that. But also we want our kids to be aware of it. We're not going to be able to change some of this stuff. We're only going to be able to help them understand the best ways that they can work with what they have, right? So, and you and I have shared about this. My oldest has, and he's given me permission, just for people that are watching. In the past, I've asked, he's given me permission to talk about him and the fact that he has a delay, so that he doesn't feel, I asked because I didn't ever want him to come across recordings and say, like, why was that happening? And he was like, no, absolutely. So, he's developmentally delayed, and there's a lot of things that come along with that. And, he feels frustration because he wants that to change. And we're not going to make the brain damage go away, right? We can talk about best ways to move forward, but we can't make it go away. And as adults, we have things in our lives that we get really frustrated about that we can't change. And we get, we push so hard against trying to make that thing change, even though we know we can't, that we waste time we could spend on figuring out how we're going to best adapt to the fact that we have that specific circumstance. Yes. And so a lot of parenting is that, whether it's you feel like you're too tall or too short, or a whole host of things that kids feel about themselves, because most of your kids out there, if you ask them something they don't like about themselves, could probably, list 3 things pretty quickly, right? So there are things that we can't change, and there are things that we can change. And so we need to figure out, how are we going to maneuver through the things that we can't change, and how are we going to effectively create change on the things that we can. And when you're the parent and you can't fix those really hard pieces, right? A developmental delay, a physical illness, heartbreak, which is gut-wrenching, right? Then the next thing that you need to do is help your child understand that there are ways to get through it. And we do that by modeling. We do that by listening. We do that by talking to other people and getting information, and not being afraid to say, like, I don't know how to handle this situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the things that we talk about in our house when my kids are, feeling frustrated about a limitation that's not changeable. I always remind them, everybody has something. Everybody in the world has something that they're struggling with, something that, like you said, they don't like about themselves, or the way that they are, or the way their brain is wired. I also have permission from my son to talk about the fact that he's neurodivergent. And there have been times in his life that it's really bothered him. Now, as he's learned compensatory strategies, as he's gotten older, and we've been able to, support him in feeling the best version of who he is, he's out there, trying to rock life now, because we've listened to the times that he's struggled. We've empathized in those times that he's struggled. We've loved him through those times that he's struggled and told him, you are enough. You are perfect the way you are. You know, I love that neurodiversity has gotten a new take where they talk about how neurodiverse kids have superpowers, right? And so what's your superpower? Because everybody has something they're not good at. So you could focus on that all day long. And we can focus on it for a little while. I'm okay with a teeny tiny pity party every now and then. Everybody's got to have them to be able to understand those feelings. Again, like you were talking about, parenting is a personal development journey. If you're doing it well, in my opinion, you're unfortunately having to do a lot of deep dive into what makes you tick, sitting with what's uncomfortable, both for myself and sitting with what's uncomfortable with my child, being able to have those really hard conversations from a place of love and understanding, being able to sort of sit with your child when they're really struggling and just be there with them, not be compelled to fix it. All of those are, you know, self-regulating when you want to yell. And like you're talking about, I'm yelling at you, but I don't really want to be yelling at you.
Yeah, exactly.
Self-awareness. That's really important to say, I'm recognizing I'm yelling at you and I don't want to do that, because they take that growing up. They learn all that they're going to learn from us. And that's, you know, generational trauma is something that I'm really focused on. And generational trauma can simply be, my mom didn't pay enough attention to me. Generational trauma could be on the opposite spectrum of severe emotional, physical, mental abuse. So it's a huge spectrum that people have to come to terms with in terms of generational trauma. But it is something that, without being able to look within yourself and understand where you're coming from as a parent, you're never going to parent any differently than your parents parented you, because you're really going with what you've been modeled.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, very much for part of that, like what you're talking about with the generational trauma. And it's like, you feel like you're always trying to avoid the things that you didn't like and imitate the things that you did like, when really at the end of the day, it's you've got to find your own way. You've got to find your own way for you. You've got to find your own way, because your children are going to be different. And I'll think of things that I wanted to have said to me, and so I'll say them, but that's not what my child wants to hear. So it is a constant learning. But I think even what you said, that we're telling our children, right, in the personal development piece, even when you take that out of it, so whether you have children or not, just on the personal growth and development piece, it's that too, like how you handle a situation today could be different from how you're going to handle a situation tomorrow, different from how you handled the situation yesterday. And learning to kind of accept that change is there, and that there's all these factors that piece together, so that when you have those moments where you make a decision that you're not thrilled about, you don't then start to catapult into this, well, now I've made this decision, so everything's ruined. And for me, for coming from kind of childhood that did have a lot of trauma, I know that's a pattern for me. I know that I start to root in that. I've gotten, better as I've gotten older, of turning to people that I know I really value their opinion and go, I'm spiraling. Like, can you help me ground right now? Because I can ground myself, but it's really nice to have somebody who kind of like helps you to sort through it all. And I think that's where, what you do with personal development and what you do with parent coaching is so much about that, is that we all have all of these things that are impacting the way that we behave and think. And how great is it for us to have somebody who's going to kind of help us bounce things off, because we're going to continue to see it through our lens until somebody helps us see it through a different lens.
Absolutely. Definitely. And then also there's the merging of the way you parent and the way your husband parents, and then the way oftentimes in-laws try to parent your parenting. There's a whole lot to navigate there. And so to be able to have a neutral party who understands where everybody is coming from, tries to find that middle ground so that everybody can feel like they're working from the same playbook, is so important. It really is.
So I'm curious, because I know you're talking about your family had the business, and so it's kind of, that's been in your family, but my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that was predominantly personal growth and development, kind of focused on professionals and things like that, of that nature. Whereas now you've brought the parenting component in. Do you think, like, what has kind of influenced your decision to do that? Where did that come from, where you were like, you know what, I want to take this approach?
I think it had to do with COVID primarily. So I just started reading all these horrifying statistics about kids' mental health and suicide rates, and watching families really devolve during the pandemic in being able to communicate, fracturing of families due to just the divisiveness of sort of the society that we live in right now, the uptick of social media and what that's doing to our kids mentally and emotionally. And I just felt like somehow I've been able to keep my own family in this wonderful little bubble. It's not perfect, do not get me wrong. I have made parenting mistakes galore, which is what helps me help other people, because I've been able to make mistakes and figure out solutions for things. But really working with friends and other people who would come to me and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this with my child. What do you think from a personal development perspective? Because they knew that what we do has to do with communication and improving relationships. And so, hey, how do you apply it to what I'm dealing with my kid? And, it's been no secret that, obviously my son is neurodivergent. I have a 6-year age gap between my children. So I have one that's in college and one that's in middle school. And so being able to help friends that had a range of ages of their children, knowing that I'd already maybe gone through some things in middle school and high school. But primarily, I think it just had to do with mental health and communication. People feeling like they couldn't talk to their kids. They didn't know how to tell their kids no, and still maintain a relationship. They didn't know how to go and have hard conversations. And so that's really where my sort of foray into the parenting thing has happened. And I've just seen some great results. And so now I'm like, I want to help as many people as I can have great relationships with their kids.
Yeah. Well, and that's your heart, right? I know that from talking to you, that if you see something and learn something, you're like, all right, where is the best way for me to share this with everybody else? So I feel that very much, and I appreciate it. So we're at 36 minutes. Obviously, I could go on talking I didn't plan on focusing the whole time on the parenting piece, but it segued nicely. And I think as summer vacation is rolling up here for people, regardless of what age your kids are at, there tends to be, right, a lot of times if kids have been in school, not all kids are in school, obviously, depending on the specific situation, but all of a sudden now you're spending more time together and having to navigate that. So I think it's apropos that we talked about, what that's all about. And again, I just think it's really important for all of us as parents to acknowledge we need help, and to acknowledge that we're scared and confused and trying our best and overwhelmed, and that there's days where we feel frustrated with our kids, because I think when we normalize that and we allow one another to have the grace to accept those things and move through them, that's when we are able to more successfully parent, because we're not also fighting off the feelings of insecurity. We're acknowledging that, like, all of this is normal, and now I'm going to do the best job that I can. So I appreciate you for bringing that to light. Yeah. And I just enjoyed the conversation, but I want to make sure before we get off, how do people get in touch with you?
You can find me on Facebook. It's the Jen Martin, or Instagram, Jennifer Martin Mindset. And you can either DM. I have a freebie on my website, but DM is probably best. That way we can have a little chat and figure out if there's a way that I can support you in, creating a better connection, or diffusing some conflict in your families, so that everybody can have an enjoyable summer, for sure. Because summer is hard. Everybody's, you want to fit. I'm in Chicago, so it's like 3 months of good weather. You want to fit a whole year's worth of activities in your 3 months, and you're still working, and your kids are off and maybe sitting on the couch, which might drive you a little crazy. So I'll be putting some content out in the next week or so on how to navigate. So if you go to my Facebook page or my Instagram, you'll see some tips and tricks on how to navigate summer, and with a little bit more ease and happiness.
Yeah. And I mean, and if people follow you on social media, they're going to be following other people who are also interested, and that's why they're following you. So they'll be able to connect with each other too. So I think that's a great format. Pick up your tips and be able to do that. Did you mention your website? You said you have a website, but I don't think you gave the URL?
I do. It's Jennifer Martin Mindset. So that's my website. Although I am
.com. Okay.
just now starting a new group called Growth Minded Moms. So it's in the works. I'll have a little bit more about that on my socials in the next couple of weeks as well. And that'll be more of a community of moms who come together and just trying to navigate the pitfalls and celebrate the successes of parenting together, because it feels like a lonely experience. Nobody's got a parallel experience, even though we all deal with maybe the same issues with our kids. Everybody's issues are totally different in how they approach them, like I said, and how they are bringing their own stuff to how they parent. And so I love that in a community of moms or parents that you can feel like you're not alone. I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I was touching my heart. I was just thinking about how important it is and how many times in my life it's felt good when somebody else has said to me, something from a parenting perspective. And you just feel that, like you said, it can be lonely when you feel that loneliness subside and you're like, okay, I belong, right? I'm doing this all right. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you so much for taking your time. I'd love for you to give everybody. You're very welcome. I'd love for you to share with everybody a final thought that you have, funny, insightful, whatever it is. Last thoughts from Jennifer Martin before we hop off.
So I think my last thought would be that growing up, my dad used to say to me all the time, do as I say, not as I do, which I think is backwards. I think that really as a parent, we need to approach things as do as I do, not as I say. And it'll set the foundation for us to try to be better parents. It'll set the foundation on how we want our kids to experience us. And also it'll be an opportunity to role model how it is that you would want them to be a parent as they get older. And that is part of that breaking generational trauma. So do as I do, not always as I say. So that's my little tidbit as we
Beautiful.
close off
Good
here.
model for life, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's live it. Live the person that we want other people to be. So
Exactly.
that's beautiful. All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you, everybody that joined us. Again, whether you were live, whether you're watching this recorded, we appreciate you. If we didn't respond to your comments, I do want you to know that we will go back and we will check on all the social media channels and make sure that we respond to you. If you would like me to introduce you to Jennifer, because you're in my network and you'd like me to tee up a conversation, please feel free to reach out. I would be more than happy to do that. And I hope everybody has a beautiful day.
Thank you so much, Deb. Have a great day.
You're very, very welcome. Yeah. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.